Dare to enter Crow's Quill's books, where tales of forgotten realms and fearless souls come alive. Today's journey, Raven's Prophecy, The Elder Trials, chapters 10 to 11 by Mark and James Lindsay. Will you uncover the truth hidden in the shadows? Chapter 10. Erik had barely rested, opting to run the entire night. It hadn't all been easy. He had glimpsed many horrors in the darkness, spiders the size of dogs, a party of trolls, a drifting night specter, and something that looked like a walking tree. Despite these horrors, he had stuck to his plan: move and don't stop. Over the years, he had been taken outside the village on many hunting and patrolling expeditions, and because of this experience, he was able to distinguish one piece of forest from another. Looking around, he knew now that he wasn't far from the village, less than an hour, and he would be receiving his first pin, one of many. Maybe all nothing was going to stand in his way in being declared champion of the trials. With this thought in mind, he dug deep within the reserves of his body and pushed himself onwards. Astrid and the others had grown up around boats, and living near the water meant they were comfortable on the water. But traveling down a mysterious body of water in the middle of the night also brought with it a new series of problems and difficulties, most of which had to do with a leaky vessel and maneuvering in the dark. They had thought the dangers that had presented themselves while navigating on land had been bad, but the images and threats that they had seen on the surface of the black waters of the river had proved much more frightening. Monstrous eyes, teeth, and bodies of all manner had slithered near the surface at one time or another, and through it all the teenagers had remained alert and ready to face the terrors of the river, and as Astrid predicted, the fast flow of the water now meant that they were making up for lost time. The center of Greytree had been prepared to receive the participants as they arrived. The timber dais used during the opening ceremony had been removed. Now the only thing that was in place was a large ring of flaming torches and a welcome banquet. A full moon sat high in the night sky. The families and the Thorn Trinity were the only ones present. Wrapped tight in furs against the bitter cold midnight had passed, and everyone was anxious. They had been waiting hours for their loved ones to return, even with the knowledge that competitors from previous trials would often return the following day. They all knew the dangers they would be facing. No one talked. The only sound was the wind whipping the surrounding flames. At first, no one heard it, a rhythmic tapping in the distance. As the time passed and the tapping got louder, it was clear that it was the sound of footsteps approaching. Everyone present whipped their heads around and waited nervously for the first of the 13. "Erik, it's Erik," Lady Asulf tittered. Unlike her husband, she was a plump and highly excitable woman. She shed tears as her son trotted up towards the finish line. Erik was a strong, motivated young man, a teenage boy who had been trained and prepared for the Elder Trials, but the figure that shuffled towards the light was exhausted and had seen much in his time away. Erik crossed the threshold and dropped to his knees. Lady Asulf was the first to move, but not alone. A younger, prettier version of herself was at the lady's side, her youngest daughter Brunhild. She threw a large hide around the boy's shoulders, then hugging him tight. Lord Asulf didn't move from his seat. Despite the dim light, he smiled broadly, the knowledge that his offspring yet again was dominant. Lord Raga saw this and failed to hide his disappointment. Over the following hours, the other participants drifted in, the nightmares of the forest leaving a profound impact upon them. Some were crying, others quiet. Every one of the Neophytes had been affected by what they had seen and experienced during their journey. It wasn't until the early hours of the morning, with the sun still yet to rise, that 4 huddled figures came into view. Astrid, Den, Ivar, and Magnus. Wet, tired, and scared. They were pressed together, shoulder to shoulder, both against threats and the dropping temperature. They crossed the line and collapsed to the ground 4 hours after Erik had arrived. They didn't care that they were last. They were only relieved that they were home, safe. Warmth and food would be quick to follow, their families racing to their sides. "I'm very proud of you," Ulrich whispered as he scooped Astrid up into his giant arms. Astrid allowed herself to be carried, like an infant. For the first time since she had departed, she felt safe and warm. "Rest, sweetheart," Druid added as they moved her to the roaring fire. Chapter 11. The first trial was unlike the other 12 to follow, as there would not be any teenager eliminated from the competition on day 1. But starting now, whoever came in last after each trial would then be excluded from the elder trials. The children were given time to rest and recover, right up until an hour before the next trial was to commence, tired and sore. They were led to the Bleeding Boar, Greytree's only tavern, named for an incident that had occurred 30 years earlier when the main course of a wedding banquet, not properly prepared, had jumped up, running through the reception, covering the bride in blood before it died. They didn't eat pork that night. The name stuck. The large hall was owned and run by the generously girthed Bard Keir, a jovial man with a flowing ginger beard. Bard had been more than happy to host the second trial, as it would draw many thirsty spectators. Within the tavern, an area had been cleared for the second trial. 6 tables on each one an octagonal board, etched with 57 equal squares, black and white in color, except for the center square, which was red. On each board there were 26 round, flat pieces, engraved with distinctive rune markings, 13 green and 13 blue. One color for each player, the game was known as Scar's Folly, named after the infamous god of the underworld. Legend had it that Scar had played this very game against Kava, the god of the forge, blacksmith to the other gods. They had played for the highest of stakes, Kava's daughter. Scar had viewed Kava as a bumbling oaf and an inferior being. He had challenged in jest, and 10 years later, the god that was lord of the volcanoes and fire, bested the master of the dead, and saved his daughter from a life in darkness. Now it was a game that was played everywhere, by both king and peasant alike. The rules were simple. Each player was given a turn, in which they would introduce a piece to the board. Each piece could only move a square at a time, except when leaping across the other player's piece, situated immediately next to. The winner was the player who had eliminated all the others' pieces and moved the king piece to the very center on the red square. The game required great strategy and forethought. Lord Raga called the second trial to order. "Welcome, children, to the second trial. Unlike the first, this will require little physical effort, but will tax and test the mind." "We have already randomly selected the first 6 matches," Raga said, and indicated a board behind him. It held the names of 12 of the teenagers who they would face in the first round, and what tables they would play at. All children studied their names, and who they would be facing. Erik Asulf's name was missing from round 1. As you may have noticed, Erik's name isn't on the board. This is because of his success in the first trial, and as such, he is omitted from round 1, Raga said. He then produced a contraption, made of brass, unusually shaped. There were several twisting pipes, a deep reservoir, and a bell. Raggy held up a jug of water and poured the contents into the open hole at the top. The water trickled slowly through the pipes, eventually turning an internal mechanism, which rung the bell. This resetted the device, and it started all over again. The bell rang precisely every 60 seconds. The games are timed. Each person will move before the bell rings. Failure to do so means you miss a turn. The first person to lose in round 1 is the official loser of the second trial, and as such, cast forth from the elder trials, Raga said. The teenagers looked shocked. "Everyone that is beaten is removed from this trial. The winners move on to the next round, until of course we have one final winner. Points awarded accordingly." Raga let the facts of the trial wash over them. "Competitors, please take your seats. We begin in 5 minutes, he announced. The children nervously filed through and took their positions. Erik found his own vantage point, interested in seeing who would prove a challenge in round 2. Good luck, and may Scar's eye does not find you this day, Raggy announced as he started his timer device. The moment the first bell sounded, players across the floor started moving their pieces. Confined to the timed duration of the bell's toll, the first few minutes were eager and reckless. Most wanted to destroy their foe quickly and absolute. No one wanted to be the first to be eliminated from the Elder Trials. Immediate families entered, remaining behind the roped barrier. They watched silently, rules dictating that any advice given would mean penalties given to the player, and the spectator ejected from the trial. Within the first 10 minutes, more onlookers poured in, the provided seats starting to fill up. Nearly 30 minutes in, and the air had grown desperate. Tension was beginning to take hold, but none so more than Ivar Dalgard, who appeared to be struggling under the constant offensive attacks from Rangvald Ackerman, the larger boy taking great pleasure in the chubby boy's desperation. Each time he moved a piece, the crowd tittered excitedly. They knew the first person would soon to be ejected from the trials. Ugh! The crowd sighed collectively as Rangvald removed another of Ivar's pieces. Seconds later, the bell sounded. Despite the moderate temperature within the tavern, Ivar was perspiring heavily. Taking a deep breath, he studied the board with narrowed brows. He knew he was now living on borrowed time. Failure imminent. Nearly ready to give in, he stood up and stretched his legs. It was in this standing position that he saw it. A pattern on the board that seemed unusual. He did a double take. He must be seeing things, Ivar thought. He glanced up at the crowd, as if challenging the people watching to prove him wrong. Time was running out, and he was now hesitant to move. Slowly and carefully, he lifted the piece, the rune on its top labeling it as a master warrior. Then, much to everyone's surprise, including his own, he jumped it back and forward across the board, the rules dictating that a piece could continue to jump an opponent if they were connected. Within seconds, Ivar had removed every one of Rangvald's pieces from the board. The bell sounded. The room was silent as the audience sat gobsmacked by the shocking turn of events. Rangvald was the first to make a sound. "That's not possible," Rangvald whispered. One of the judges leapt into action and scrutinized their game. Several seconds ticked by. The judge nodded. "That's not possible," Rangvald roared, now jumping to his feet, realization hitting him hard in the stomach. The judge moved to Ivar's side and raised the boy's hand high. The crowd cheered. Rangvald also moved around the table, only he wasn't intending on congratulating his opponent. Instead, he balled his left hand into a fist, and without warning socked the Dalgard boy hard in the eye. Ivar raised his hands defensively, the other judges dashing forward and restraining Rangvald, who was struggling like a wild pit viper. "This is absurd. I don't know how he did it." "But he cheated," Rangvald cried, his face as red as a farmer's beet. Even after he was pushed roughly from the hall, everyone could still hear his outraged voice. Seated, flushed, and still clutching his eye, the crowd could clearly see the toothy smile of Ivar Dalgard. Relishing his win against the odds, Rangvald was followed quickly by Mist, Katla, Torben, Den, and Bjorg, who was speechless in defeat. The second round saw defeat for Emma, Pace, and Ivar, who, despite his loss, was still grinning happily. Mjol, Astrid, and Magnus were then instructed to draw straws for the third round, which saw the Osborne girl and the blacksmith's daughter face off. A relieved Magnus took a seat at the final table. Mjol and Astrid took their places and stared off, both wanting to end this game quickly and decisively. Word had spread through the village, and anyone not working was now present. Mjol took the first move. This was followed quickly by Astrid. Their moves occurring on each bell strike. Nearly an hour passed, with neither one looking away. Astrid scanned the board, confident of her next move. She removed the sorcerer from the board and stared at her opponent triumphant. However, the gaze that Mjol returned was one of sly content. The moment the bell sounded, the Osborne girl swiftly moved her piece, the king. It danced across the board, removing Astrid's final 4 pieces, before landing on the red square. Dead center, Astrid knew she had been beaten by the better player. She stood up and shook her opponent's hand, Mjol nodding her thanks. The crowd cheered. There was a brief respite before the final match. Mjol and Magnus were given time to refresh before they faced off on one another. Both parties were able to receive others into their confidence, and there were many, men who assumed their knowledge of the game was superior to others. Parents and friends passed on their experience until Lord Raggy cleared his throat and called for order. The second trial is nearly at an end. Both competitors have fought hard to be where they are now. I ask that all spectators keep with the spirit of the trials and remain quiet during this final game, Lord Rag announced. There was a general nodding of heads and murmuring of approval. Satisfied that honor would be maintained, Raga pointed to the bellkeeper who started them off with a loud and distinct chime. Magnus was the first to move. Mjol smiled and removed the smaller boy's queen. The onlookers groaned their disapproval. They knew that Magnus had sacrificed his most powerful piece. To stay in the game was now a slim probability. In her haste, Mjol made a fast and rash move, exactly what Magnus was hoping for. The moment she made the move, the game had been altered in Magnus's favor. From that moment on, the considerable audience watched closely. Magnus was quick to respond, his attack leaving a sizable dent in the Osborne girl's defense. Mjol used her entire time to analyze her weaknesses. With seconds to spare, Mjol used her piece to jump across the board. No one was sure if her move was even legal. At the end, Magnus's pieces were gone. Mjol smiled. The act rare. Magnus smiled back, happy that he had done everything he could. He surrendered to the superior foe. From the back of the room, Erik brooded. He was happy that Magnus had been defeated, by a girl no less. But the fact that the skinny little whelp had managed to get as far as he did was troubling. Something had to be done, Lord Asulf's son thought. That seals today's tale in shadows. We hope Raven's prophecy, The Elder Trials, has drawn you deeper into its enigma. Return soon to Crow's Quill's books, where the next chapter awaits, whispering secrets yet untold.